Imagine you're driving to the most important meeting of your life. You're calm, prepared, confident. And then, out of nowhere, someone cuts you off. No warning, no signal. Just a blur of metal that nearly clips your front bumper. Your heart explodes. Your hands grip the wheel. Every cell in your body screams at you to honk, to swerve, to yell something through the windshield that you'd never say to someone's face. And maybe you do. Maybe you spend the next 10 minutes replaying it, seething, crafting the perfect insult you wish you delivered, letting that stranger live rent-free inside your mind. You walk into the meeting rattled, off your game, and somewhere on the highway that other driver has already forgotten you exist. Who lost that interaction? You did, and you didn't lose because someone cut you off. You lost because you let a single moment, 3 seconds of someone else's carelessness, hijack the next hour of your life. The Stoics had a word for this kind of mental hijacking. They called it path, uncontrolled passions, involuntary emotional reactions that pull you off course before your reason even has a chance to show up. And they spent centuries developing a system to fix it. Today we're going inside that system, not as a history lesson, as a manual. Because the difference between a person who reacts and a person who responds is not temperament, not genetics, not luck. It is philosophy. Practice daily, and it will change your life. There's a quote you've probably seen floating around self-help content. It's often misattributed, but it captures something ancient and true. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom. The Stoics didn't just know about that space. They treated it like sacred ground. Their entire philosophical project, across centuries from Athens to Rome, from former slaves to emperors, was devoted to expanding that space, making it wider, making it livable. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the greatest empire on earth while simultaneously writing private philosophical notes to himself, notes he never intended for publication, described this space constantly. In his meditations, he writes of pausing before reacting, of asking himself what faculty is being demanded of him, of stepping back from the fire of first impulse. Here is what he understood and what modern neuroscience has since confirmed. Your brain has 2 modes of operation when something threatening, offensive, or unexpected happens. The first is automatic. It's ancient. It's the amygdala firing before the prefrontal cortex even gets the memo. This is the part that kept your ancestors alive. It doesn't care about context. It doesn't care about nuance. It sees a threat and it moves fast. The second mode is deliberate, slower, wiser. It can take in context, imagine consequences, weigh options, and choose with intention rather than instinct. Reacting is the first mode running unopposed. Responding is the second mode getting its moment. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate the first mode. They weren't robots. Epictetus, who was enslaved for most of his early life and whose writings influenced everyone from Emperor Marcus Aurelius to the astronauts who trained for isolation in space, Epictetus was not advocating for the removal of human emotion. He was advocating for its governance. There is a difference, he taught, between a feeling arising and a feeling ruling, between the first jolt of anger and the choice to remain angry, between the first flash of fear and the decision to let fear dictate your actions. You cannot always control what starts in your chest, but you can almost always control what you do with it next. That is the beginning of Stoic practice, and it starts with understanding something called the dichotomy of control. Open to the very first lines of Epictetus's Enchiridion, his handbook, the pocket guide that his student Arian compiled from his lectures, and you find this: some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. This is the foundation. Everything else the Stoics built, every exercise, every meditation, every practice, rests on this distinction. And here is the brutal, clarifying, almost offensive simplicity of it. Almost nothing outside your own mind is truly in your control. Not the traffic, not the weather, not what your boss thinks of you, not whether your flight is delayed, not how other people behave, not what they say about you behind your back, not whether the project fails, not whether the economy collapses, not whether the person you love decides to leave. These things affect you. They have consequences. They matter, but they are not in your control. What is in your control Entirely, exclusively, always, is how you interpret events, what you tell yourself about them, what value you assign them, what action you choose in response. Now, this is where most people stop listening, because it sounds like a recipe for passivity, like a philosophical shrug at the injustices of the world. But that is a complete misreading. The Stoics were not passive. Marcus Aurelius led armies. Cato fought Caesar. Epictetus advocated for human dignity against the institution of slavery from within its iron grip. These were not men who said, "Oh well," and looked the other way. The dichotomy of control is not about caring less. It is about directing your energy correctly. Think of it this way. You have a finite reservoir of mental and emotional energy every single day. Every time you spend that energy on something you cannot control, on the reaction of someone who wronged you, on the outcome of a situation already decided, on the reputation damage already done, you are pouring water on the floor. The Stoic discipline is the practice of picking up that reservoir and aiming it somewhere it can actually do something. You can't control whether your coworker undermines you in a meeting, but you can control how you respond in the meeting, what you do afterwards, what documentation you create, what conversations you initiate, and how you carry yourself while it's happening. You can't control whether you receive a devastating diagnosis, but you can control whether you spend the following weeks in rage at the universe or in deliberate, clear-eyed action toward whatever quality of life is still available to you. You can't control the stimulus. You can control the response, every single time. If the dichotomy of control is the what you focus on, then the 4 Stoic virtues are the how. The character you build so that when the moment of crisis arrives, you have something to draw from. The Stoics identified 4 virtues as the cornerstones of a well-lived life. Not happiness, not comfort, not success, virtue. Because they believed that virtue, moral excellence, was the only truly good thing, the only thing that couldn't be taken from you by fortune, circumstance, or another person's cruelty. The first virtue is wisdom, not intelligence, not knowledge. Wisdom, phronesis in Greek, is the capacity to discern what is truly good, what is truly harmful, and what is neither. It is the ability to see clearly when everything inside you is pushing you toward distortion. When you're humiliated and your mind starts constructing revenge fantasies, wisdom is what says, "Wait, what is actually happening here? What is actually being asked of me?" Wisdom is the pause before the response. The second virtue is justice. This is the recognition that you are not the center of the universe, that other people have dignity equal to your own, that your actions ripple outward into a community, and that you are responsible for those ripples. When you want to react to someone with cruelty because they were cruel to you first, justice is what reminds you that 2 people acting badly does not improve anything. When you are tempted to dismiss someone's concern because you're under pressure, justice is what keeps you honest. The third virtue is courage, not the absence of fear. The Stoics weren't foolish. They understood that fear arises. Courage is the decision to act rightly in the presence of fear, not in its absence. But courage in the Stoic sense is broader than battlefield bravery. It is the courage to tell the truth when lying is easier. The courage to say, "I was wrong," when pride is screaming at you to double down. The courage to stay calm when everyone around you is spiraling. Responding, rather than reacting, takes courage. Because the reactive path is almost always the path of least resistance. Screaming back at the person who screamed at you feels natural. Holding your ground, breathing, choosing your words, that takes effort. That takes nerve. The fourth virtue is temperance, sophrosin, moderation, self-regulation. The capacity to govern your appetites and impulses rather than being governed by them. This is perhaps the most misunderstood virtue. Temperance is not about being joyless or austere. Marcus Aurelius enjoyed wine, theater, and the company of friends. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. Temperance is about not needing any of it, not being controlled by the desire for more, not losing your capacity for judgment the moment comfort is threatened. When an impulse rises, to react, to retaliate, to indulge, to escape, temperance is the internal mechanism that says, "I notice this. I choose what to do with it." Together, these 4 virtues aren't abstract ideals. They are the architecture of a person who responds rather than reacts. They are what you practice until they become who you are. Philosophy without practice is decoration. The Stoics knew this. They were not armchair thinkers. They had ascesis, disciplined exercises, daily rituals, specific techniques designed to train the mind the way an athlete trains the body. Before you begin your day, the Stoics recommended a brief but deliberate practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not as pessimism, as preparation. Seneca wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." The practice is simple. In the morning, before the day's chaos arrives, you spend a few minutes considering what difficulties might arise. Not to catastrophize, to prepare. You might think, today someone might irritate me, a plan might fail, I might receive criticism, technology might break at the worst moment, traffic might make me late for something important. And for each anticipated difficulty, you ask yourself, if this happens, how do I want to respond? You are rehearsing the response before the stimulus arrives. You are expanding that space between trigger and reaction before you need it, so that when you need it, it's already there. This is not pessimism. Pessimism says, bad things will happen and there's nothing I can do. This practice says, bad things may happen, and I have already decided who I will be when they do. Marcus Aurelius ended his days by reviewing them. The Stoic philosopher Seneca described a similar practice, sitting with himself each night and asking, where did I go wrong today? What did I do well? What will I do differently tomorrow? This is not self-flagellation. It is calibration. When you review a day without honesty, you either feel vaguely good or vaguely bad and don't know why. When you review it with Stoic precision, you begin to notice patterns. You notice which situations reliably trigger your reactive mode. You notice which people, which times of day, which emotional states, which types of pressure make it hardest for you to respond rather than react. And once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. The Stoics regularly practiced imagining the loss of things they valued. Their health, their wealth, their loved ones, their reputation. Not obsessively, not morbidly, but deliberately and briefly. Amor fati, love of fate, was the Stoic disposition toward whatever life brought. But you cannot genuinely embrace what you have if you've never really seen it. Negative visualization is the practice of seeing clearly. When you spend 1 minute truly imagining life without something you currently take for granted, the use of your hands, the presence of a person you love, the job that frustrates you but pays your rent, you return to your actual life with something close to gratitude. And gratitude, the Stoics understood, is a powerful antidote to reactive anger. It is very hard to fly into a rage about a minor inconvenience when you have recently reminded yourself that your life contains extraordinary gifts you did nothing to earn. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to a particular contemplative practice. He would zoom out, deliberately, radically. He would remind himself that the Roman Empire, the most powerful political entity in the known world, the thing that consumed his every waking hour, was, in the cosmic scale of time and space, barely a blip. That the men who had come before him, whose names seemed immortal in his time, were already forgotten. That in a few centuries, his own name might disappear entirely. And rather than find this depressing, he found it clarifying. Because if the whole drama of Roman imperial politics would dissolve into insignificance eventually, what about this argument? What about this slight? What about this disappointment? The view from above is not nihilism. It doesn't say nothing matters. It says, let's be honest about what matters most, and let's not mistake temporary friction for existential catastrophe. The next time someone says something that makes your blood boil, try zooming out, not to dismiss the situation, but to see it in proportion. Is this something that will still sting in 5 years? In 1 year? In 1 month? In 1 week? If the answer is no, and it usually is, then your response can be proportional to the actual weight of the event, rather than to the distorted weight your reactive brain assigned it in the first moment. Let's slow down and look at what actually happens inside a reactive moment, because understanding the mechanism is how you begin to interrupt it. Something happens. Let's say a friend says something dismissive about a project you've been pouring yourself into for months. Casually, maybe without even realizing how it lands. First comes the impression, the raw data of the event arriving in your mind. Then comes the judgment, almost instantaneous, often unconscious, the story your mind wraps around that impression. She doesn't respect my work. He thinks I'm incompetent. They never take me seriously. Then comes the impulse, the emotional charge generated by the judgment, anger, hurt, shame, defensiveness. And then, and this is the crucial part, comes either a reaction or a response. The Stoics called the judgment step the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the place where you are most free, because the impression arrives automatically and the impulse follows the judgment reliably, but the judgment itself is where you have agency. Epictetus was merciless about this. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things, not by events, by interpretations. Your friend's dismissive comment is an event. The interpretation, she thinks I'm worthless, is yours. And a different interpretation, she was distracted or thoughtless, or doesn't realize how much this means to me, is equally available to you." This is not about excusing bad behavior. It's not about telling yourself pleasant lies. It is about accuracy, because the reactive interpretation is almost never the most accurate one. It is the most alarmed one. The Stoic practice is to catch the judgment before it calcifies into certainty, to hold it up to the light and ask, is this the only way to see this? Is this the most charitable interpretation consistent with the available evidence? What would I see if I were calmer? This is not weakness. This is precision thinking under fire. And it is a skill, a learnable, practicable, improvable skill. The physical sensations of a reactive state, the tight chest, the heat in the face, the raised heartbeat, the clenched jaw, these are not evidence that you must act immediately. They are information. They are your body's way of saying, something significant is happening here. Pay attention. The reactive person interprets those sensations as a command. Do something now. The responding person interprets them as a flag. Slow down. This moment matters. Choose carefully. One of the most powerful things you can do in a charged moment is say nothing for 3 seconds. Just breathe. Let the wave of impulse peak and pass slightly before you speak. 3 seconds feels like forever when you're activated. It is not. And in those 3 seconds, the prefrontal cortex, the deliberate, wise, contextually aware part of your brain, has time to contribute something to the conversation. Marcus Aurelius wrote of speaking not more than what the occasion requires. He was not referring to brevity for its own sake. He was noting that measured speech, speech that emerges from thought rather than from heat, carries more weight, causes less damage, and achieves more. In a reactive moment, the internal question is almost always some version of, how do I win this? How do I hurt this person back? How do I prove my point? How do I come out on top? In a responding moment, the question is different. What does wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance ask of me here? Sometimes they ask the same thing, that you push back firmly, that you defend yourself clearly, that you name what happened. The Stoics were not pacifists, but sometimes they ask something harder. They ask you to let a small injury go without comment, because commenting would escalate something not worth escalating. They ask you to apologize when the other person was also wrong, because waiting for perfect moral conditions before being accountable is just pride wearing philosophical clothing. They ask you to tell someone a difficult truth gently rather than cruelly, because justice includes both honesty and care for the person receiving it. After a response, not during, but after, the distinction between what you can and cannot change is crucial. If you responded well and the situation still went badly, the Stoic question is not how could I have controlled the outcome. It is, did I act well? Did I bring my best to the moment? If the answer is yes, then the outcome, however painful, is not a failure of character. It is the nature of a world where other people have their own agency, their own bad days, their own irreducible freedom to respond to you poorly, no matter how well you behaved. You control the input. You do not control the outcome. And the Stoic path is learning to find satisfaction in the quality of your own action, independent of whether it produced the result you hoped for. Marcus Aurelius failed. He wrote in his meditations about his own anger, his own impatience, his own moments of reactive weakness. He was the most powerful man in the known world, and he still struggled to hold his tongue in Senate meetings. He still felt irritation rise when advisors disagreed with him. He still found himself, at the end of some days, knowing that he had not been his best self. He kept writing anyway. He kept practicing. He kept showing up to the philosophy not because he had mastered it, but because the practice itself was the point. It is not a destination you arrive at and then relax. It is a direction you orient yourself toward every single day, knowing that you will sometimes turn away from it and having to turn back. Epictetus put it plainly: don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. The goal is not to become a person who never reacts. The goal is to become a person who, when they react, notices it faster, who recovers more quickly, who reacts less often and less severely than they did before, who builds, over years of practice, a character that is harder to destabilize and quicker to return to center. You will have bad days. Someone will say exactly the right thing to pierce your defenses, and you will fire back before your wisdom shows up. You will let someone's incompetence ruin your afternoon. You will spend 20 minutes rehearsing an argument with someone who isn't in the room. These are not evidence that Stoicism doesn't work. They are evidence that you are human, and that the practice continues. Every morning is another rehearsal. Every difficult moment is another chance to close the gap between the person you are and the person you have decided to become. We began with a car, with a near miss, with 3 seconds of someone else's carelessness that almost took the next hour of your life with it. Here's what a Stoic does in that moment. They feel the surge. They don't pretend it isn't there, but they catch the judgment before it locks in. They ask, what actually happened? An inconvenience, a near miss. Both of us intact. In 15 minutes, this is over. They take a breath. They loosen their grip on the wheel. They drive to the meeting the way they intended, present, prepared, in possession of themselves. And the other driver? Gone. Already forgotten. Not living in their head, not burning their energy, not shaping their day. That is the difference between reacting and responding. It sounds small when you describe it. It is enormous when you live it. The Stoics built this practice over centuries because they understood something that modern life keeps forgetting. Your mind is not something that happens to you. It is something you build, deliberately, daily, one moment, one breath, one chosen response at a time. Start today. If you found this valuable, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus' discourses are as close as your phone. The philosophy is 2,000 years old and has never been more urgently useful. Leave a comment with the Stoic practice you're going to start first. Subscribe if you want more of this. And remember, between every stimulus and every response, there is a space. That space belongs to you.